There are scenes in this show that can be disturbing to listen to. Listener discretion is advised.
I, Lieutenant Darrell Ryder of the Swadera Township Police Department, in the presence of Corporal Timothy Chateau and
Joseph D. Miller.
Understand that you're being video recorded.
Right.
Okay.
Joey, did you kill all the girls in the landfill?
Yeah.
So you would be out with them, you'd meet them, be drinking and partying, and what would you tell them? Why would they think you were going? What were they thinking when you took them to the landfill?
They thought we were going to another bar.
At what point did any of the girls realize something was wrong? Did any of them say anything to you when you got there? Like, did they start to figure out something was wrong?
No, actually they didn't say anything wrong, you know what I mean?
So the reason they didn't question is because you were going to be paying for sex, and that was a place you could take them to have sex where nobody would see. So that's why they understood it was okay.
Right.
All right.
Kelly Ann Ward, 26. Selena Franklin, 18. Stephanie McDuffie, 23 and 8 months pregnant. Jeanette Thomas, 25. And Kathy Schenk, age unknown. Those are the 5 confirmed murder victims of serial killer Joseph Daniel Miller. From at least 1986 to 1990, Miller assaults and kills women in the Harrisburg area of Pennsylvania. And he isn't even hugely shy about it. People who know him then say he drinks a lot. And when he drinks, he becomes a different person. And when he becomes that different person, he talks. And when he talks, the stories he tells family and friends, the things he says, well, they can't possibly be true, can they? It's just Joey being Joey, spouting off. Well, they're partially right about that. It's definitely Joey being Joey. But he's not spouting off, and nobody is out to stop him. We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad, but a select few step outside of all society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant. Welcome back to Deviant, where we explore the dark corners of what humans are capable of. I'm Dan Szematowicz, and I'm so happy to be back here telling you stories. And just a reminder, you can find out more about the stories we're telling by checking out our Patreon and our socials. Patreon, deviantpodcast.com. Starts at the free tier, all sorts of pictures and audio and videos that you can watch that'll supplement what you're hearing here. And also social is a great place to check us out too. We're on Instagram and TikTok at deviant.podcast. With all that said, let's get to our exploration of serial killer Joseph Daniel Miller. It's August 6th, 1992, just before 3 a.m. At the time, Conrail is one of the largest railroads in America. They ship freight all over and operate thousands of miles of track. On this night, a Conrail security employee is patrolling the tracks just outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He stumbles onto a horrific sight. A man is clearly in the middle of sexually assaulting a woman. She's bound, gagged, and lying in a ditch, but she's alive. Her attacker is apparently taking a break to enjoy a beer. The security guard calls the police. The man runs, leaving his car behind, a car containing duct tape, some ropes, a knife. This is where things begin to break down for Joseph Allen Miller. It begins a police investigation that won't take too long to catch up with him and uncover who he really is and the extent of what he's done. But we'll get to that in a bit. Joey Miller isn't one of Pennsylvania's more well-known serial killers, but he is one of its most prolific.
I'm John Lucy. I've been a journalist for 35 plus years. most of it based in Harrisburg, where Penn Live is one of the dominant news sources, not only in central PA, where Harrisburg is based, but across the state.
John's covered Miller and his crimes for years, and he's going to help us tell this story. He's been a major asset in our understanding of all this, and you should really go check out his coverage on Penn Live. Joseph Daniel Miller is born in Steelton, Pennsylvania in 1964. It's a suburb of Harrisburg, and it's where he grows up, and grows up hard.
It's a river city situated right on the Susquehanna River, which heads down to the Chesapeake Bay, about an hour away from Baltimore, which I think is the nearest big city, and about 90 minutes, depending on traffic, to Philly. Radiating out of Harrisburg, you have, farmland on one side of, what used to be a lot of farmland now that are housing developments on one side of the river. But on the other side, it's definitely older and more industrial. And one of those industrial towns, very much like Western PA, is Steelton. It was a steel town. There was a Bethlehem Steel mill right along the river. A lot of it has gone the way of rust, as also has happened in Western PA. But that's where Joey Miller grew up. It's a diverse ethnic town, hardworking people, hard-nosed people. And Joey Miller was one of the hardest. Just a wiry, scrappy, short-statured, and also short-tempered dude with a lisp. According to people who knew him, neighbors, and even relatives, if you throw down with Joey, you're fighting to the death. I mean, he's just relentless, unstoppable, has a violent streak that could have been instilled in him by a sort of a rough upbringing. And then also he got involved in crime early as a juvenile. There was testimony at the trial that he was raped at possibly 14. And then also may have been the subject of some heavy-handed guards as well. So he had a well-earned reputation for violence even before he became a suspect in these deaths of Black women in Harrisburg starting in about 1986.
If you look at Miller from the outside, he appears to be a typical working-class dude in a working-class town living a working-class life.
He was always employed. He was a handyman type guy, would work on houses, work on different projects around town for employers, and apparently could fix anything. You see an air conditioner at the side of the road that somebody else was throwing out as junk. He could get it working.
That work also serves him in the part of his life that you can't see from the outside.
Because he did a lot of manual labor, just hands like vice grips. Very strong, very wiry, very confident in his physicality, and would not back down from anyone or anything. And that's why he was able to traffic in some of these historically Black bars in the inner city of Harrisburg. I mean, he had a reputation nobody messed with, so he was able to go into historically Black bars in the mid 80s when there was almost one on every corner, a bar, and there was a lot of cocaine going around at the time, and he trafficked in it all.
By now, you're probably getting the picture. A violent upbringing, escalating criminal behavior, the telltale signs of a budding serial sexual killer.
There were indications of this, and even before the string of homicides, before that began in 85 or 86, he was also witnessed by a friend picking up a prostitute at gunpoint in Harrisburg and forcing her to perform sex acts at gunpoint.
So back to that August night in 1992. Joey Miller has just been caught in the act by a railroad security employee, and he's run off. The police arrive quickly, and this is where Detective Tom Brennan enters the story.
He's a Vietnam vet, by this time a veteran of the Pennsylvania State Police, some 24 or 5 years. He worked his way up to detective. On a lot of other cases, he had some FBI training at Quantico and even did some work for them as well. And then he's the chief county detective, basically working for the district attorney at the time in Dauphin County, gathering up evidence that the DA uses then to prosecute.
It's the kind of FBI training Brennan receives that's immediately valuable here. It's with the BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, the Mind Hunters. Yeah, it's a pretty extraordinary coincidence, but sometimes good luck happens.
And he was called out to the scene that night. And that was his first sort of read of Joey Miller, basically just looking at what was left at that railroad scene. And really everything sort of dawned on him that this was a serial killer.
While Detective Brennan is wrapping his head around all this, Joey Miller knows that he's in trouble. He's messed up. His car and a living witness are all right there for the police. It's not going to be long before they're looking for him. He runs to his home in Steelton, immediately takes a shower to get rid of any physical evidence, and then begins crafting his version.
He actually talked to a relative to try to get his story straight. He was going to claim that the woman was demanding money from him and that he had to sort of tie her up to keep her from assaulting him. He was going to try to turn that around.
Obviously, the police then run the car's registration and they go immediately to scoop up Miller. He's home, but he doesn't go quietly.
Joseph Miller, known then as Joey, held police at bay for 6 hours from atop a 3-story building. Conrail police had chased him to the location after catching him trying to murder a woman near some railroad tracks. The victim had been bound and gagged.
He ended up going up on a roof in Steelton and creating a big scene that he was going to jump. And there were actually people on the street saying, hey, why don't you jump?
Detective Brennan is back at the scene near the railroad tracks, continuing to process everything there. He's already getting the picture of who he's dealing with.
But the detective who sort of read this guy like a book from the very beginning says, because he wanted to process the scene. There was so much value in processing the scene in terms of down the line, thinking there was going to be more victims. He said, just don't give him anything to eat or drink. He'll come down. It was early August. It was a tar roof. He knew it was going to be hot as hell. And sure enough, Joey Miller did come down when the sun was blazing, and he was arrested without incident later that day.
This is when Detective Brennan first encounters Miller. He walks into the room in which he's being held and immediately asserts himself.
And then he presented himself to Joey later that day after his arrest. He presented his card and said, I want to talk to you, but we're going to do this with you waiving your rights properly and all that type of thing. And when you want to talk, I'll be here, but I'm going to get you for all of them. A few days later, Brennan does get a call that Joey wants to talk. They sit down, the tape is running, and Brennan is painstakingly making sure Joey is waiving all of his rights so that when they do get to the meat and potatoes of this, everything is admissible in court. Unfortunately, when Joey makes the first admission, the tape recorder is off because Brennan is doing some of that rights waiver paperwork. And that's when Joey Miller first says, I can take you to a body. And then he hurriedly gets the tape back rolling again. They say, hey, you just said we could go to a body. He eventually leads them to sort of this dump area, which is literally right outside of the city. And they roll in there, and Brennan's looking around at some of the mounds of garbage. And like the one that really struck him was, it was like wood was piled up, and then there was like a rusting car seat on top of it. And Joey's kind of pointing at different places and saying there's a body here and a body there. And Brennan's looking at it and say, these are really grave markers. In his mind, he's thinking this, and obviously one of the fetishes of a true serial killer is to either take trophies from the victims or to go back to where the bodies are, which he did, and they were marked by these sort of grave markers. And at that moment, this was late in the day and the sun was falling, and he said, okay, we're going to seal this up and come back the next morning with a full court press of forensics and get to the bottom of this. And that's where Joey pulls his first surprise.
This is one thing many serial sexual offenders love to do, especially after they've been caught. Play games, assert dominance, revel in their notoriety, and build their legend.
Well, he comes back, and by that point, everything had leaked. It's a media circus. There's all kind of forensics team and state police there, and in addition to the local township police. And basically, they're all set to go. Joey's supposed to be sort of pointing out specifics of things. And he said, well, it was all BS. I just made that up. He recants. And Brennan kind of called his bluff a little bit. On the surface, he gets out of the car and he makes a show that people are leaving. You know what I mean? He tells Joey recanted and a bunch of people leave. He clears the media out. But he does keep a small forensics unit behind, and he instructs them to go to that pile of debris with the car seat on and to start probing in and around it, not underneath it, but near it. And after some digging, they find a human femur bone, and one of the forensics persons runs up to the car because they're still sitting in the car. Brennan and Miller. In the middle of August, the air conditioning of the car is straining. It's a running car. And Brennan sees this person coming up. He gets out, gets the news that there's a femur, and then he sort of presents that to Joey, who's kind of shocked by it, but denies it. Well, you can't, that's not, he said, well, then Brennan says, knowing that Joey is loving every minute of this, and he sees that, because he has this prominent vein in his temple, and Brennan can almost see Joey's heartbeat and pulse quickening in that throbbing vein, knowing that this is exciting him, and the proximity to his victims is the thrill here. And he said, well, yeah, I guess if it's not yours, we'll take you back to the prison, the Dauphin County prison where he was lodged. And he goes, no. And so he stays, and at that point, Brennan brings the whole forensics team back. He calls in a pathologist from Allentown. He comes in by helicopter, and it's this big excavation of this dump over the next days, weeks, and eventually they had these interrogations, and slowly, in fits and starts, and weaving his own web of half-truths mixed with lies, Brennan slowly revealed more and more victims tied to Joey Miller.
Over this time, it becomes apparent that this is indeed Joseph Miller's private graveyard. Authorities begin finding more victims.
And at that point, they have the remains of 2 victims, one of whom was pregnant at the time of her death.
This is the beginning of a massive investigation that will span years. Sometimes Joey's helpful, sometimes he's not. Police are searching for more victims, more connections to Joey. And as they continue to dig, it turns out Joey Miller is standing there in plain sight from the beginning for anybody willing to look, listen, and believe.
He was on the police radar as far back as '86. He was seen with one of the victims just prior to her disappearance. He was interviewed by police. One of his relatives was asked to wear a wire because he was also bragging about killing women. And he was also at one point showed up at someone's house asking for a shovel. And when asked why, he said, well, I killed somebody. And he had a bracelet of one of his victims hanging from his rearview mirror of his car. And he would apparently joke with friends and relatives that, well, I mean, all they can prove is that she was in my car. And that victim, where police investigated him, knew that, but they'll never find the body, is what he would tell them. He was seen on a ATM video with one of the other victims later. I think it was in the early 90s, and Pennsylvania State Police were investigating him for that, but he was able to keep going.
The story of Miller and his victims is one that hits themes that are starting to become common in the stories we tell about serial killers. Miller chooses black and brown women, many of them sex workers, women who live on the edge of society. And he absolutely knows what he's doing.
The best summation of his victimology is attributed to Joey himself, who quipped to the detective that had interviewed him at various stages over 13 years, unraveling more and more victims and tying them to Joey. He once told him, well, if the first one was a white debutante, you guys would have been all over me, because they were Black or minority women, some of whom worked as prostitutes, some of them who did not.
Over the next several years, authorities will conduct a massive investigation that continues to find more victims. Over the first few years of it, 3 murders are tied to him and 3 attempted murders. Joey Miller pleads guilty to 1 murder, and then, through interrogations, admissions, and evidence, is definitively tied to 2 others. The 3 known at this point are Selena Franklin, Stephanie McDuffie, and Kathy Schenck. But there are still 2 killings police attribute to Miller that he doesn't admit: Jeanette Thompson and the woman who turned out to be his very first victim, Kelly Ann Ward. But they can't definitively tie him to those crimes. That changes in 2016. Miller is in prison, serving life. He asks to speak with detectives. He wants to come clean. They show up and turn on a video camera.
I wanted to speak to you two about clearing this incident up with the district attorney, without an attorney, get through this process, so I can get out of here and get this over with, and give the victim's family peace of mind, and clear the record.
It's 2016 and Joseph Miller is in prison for life. He's the confirmed killer of 3 women and is ready to confess to 2 more, Kelly Ann Ward and Jeanette Thompson. Police give him his choice of who to start with, and you can tell that Miller, he has an opinion and is eager to relive this.
So, do you have one that you prefer to talk about first, or?
We can talk about Jeanette Thompson first, if you want.
Okay.
Jeanette goes missing in January of 1990. She's last seen leaving a bar with a man. The man turns out to be Joseph Miller, and he picks up the story from here. There are portions of what you're about to hear that can be a difficult listen. And as you're listening, keep in mind that serial killers are pathological liars, so don't take his word for his motivations and detailed actions.
I know I met her in the bar. There was a Stilton bar across from the firehouse. There used to be a club over there. And from there, we went out drinking. Then we went up to by the landfill. We had sex and stuff. And then we kind of got into an argument. And one thing led to another. And I ended up killing her.
Now, when you said that you had sex, were you paying for the sex? Was she a prostitute?
No, actually it was consensual sex.
Okay. What was he arguing about?
It had something to do with something stupid over money. And I was pretty wasted that night. And one thing led to another. She smacked me, and then I got pissed off, and I just hit her. I think I hit her with an old tire iron or something in the head.
Was that something that you found there?
Yeah, it was laying in the landfill.
What happened when you hit her with the tire iron in the head?
She just fell down. She didn't get back up. So then I figured she was dead, so I just dragged her body over by a lake bed and just covered it up with leaves and stuff.
I know from being involved in some of your incidents before that sometimes you would go back and you would visit the crime scene.
Right.
With her, did you ever go back to the scene at all where you had placed her body?
No, I don't think I ever did go back. So, I might have walked through just to see if the body was ever discovered or something. I think it was discovered, and I never went back again.
Did you know before you left with her that you were going to kill her?
No, I didn't actually know that I was going to do that. It just happened, you know what I mean? It was a heat of the moment when she smacked me and I got pissed off after we had sex and stuff. And then she just, I forget what we were arguing about. It had to do with money or something. And then she smacked me, and I got pissed off. And I just picked up the piece of metal object lying there, and I picked it up and I hit her with it in the head.
How many times did you hit her, Joe?
I think maybe 2 or 3 times.
Did you hit her after she fell into the ground?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was she crying or screaming or anything?
No, actually she didn't scream or anything. So I guess she was unconscious, I guess.
So you hit her a few times just to make sure she was dead?
Yeah. So, and that's basically all I remember about that one.
When you placed her down in the landfill, is that why then you decided to place Selena Franklin and McDuffie in the same area because it was?
Well, actually, Selena McDuffie was the first one I put in the landfill.
Okay.
And then it was Selena, and then it was Selena and then McDuffie, and then I couldn't forget her name. The other one.
Now that he's confessed to killing Jeanette, the conversation turns to Kelly Ann Ward. Kelly is Joey Miller's very first known murder victim. She disappears in 1986. Her remains are found in 1997 by a road crew, but it isn't until 2014 that she's identified. Watching the tape, you can tell that the opportunity to relive this, his first murder, it's special to him. You can hear it in his voice. Again, this can be difficult to listen to.
I met Anna Ward uptown, but it was in the uptown area.
Where did you meet her at uptown?
Was it at a bar or on the street?
Yeah, it was a bar on the corner. I remember it was late at night. I met her, and
Well, what happened after you met her?
I met her. We hung out for a little bit, and then she wanted some money, so I went that night to my brother-in-law's house to try to get some money from him. And
She wanted money for sex?
yeah.
Right.
So then I gave her the money, and then we went out. We partied a little more, and then we ended up at the landfill. And then we had sex, and then she wasn't satisfied with the money I gave her. And then she started talking about she wanted more money, and then I thought I didn't have any more. And we got into a heated argument, and I was like, oh. And one thing led to another.
You need to be a little bit more specific than that.
Okay, well, I was already mad about the fact that she wanted more money after we agreed on, 25 that I already gave her. And she wanted more money, and she talked about she's gonna have to tell the cops that I raped her, and did this, did that. So then I just killed her.
How did you kill her?
It was a piece of pipe object.
Was that the piece of pipe that Brennan showed you up at Smithfield?
Yeah.
Joey, how many times did you hit her with the pipe?
A couple times, I think.
Now, did she fall down after you hit her the first time?
No, actually, she didn't fall down the first time, so I hit her a couple more times.
Where did you hit her? What part of her
In the
body?
head.
And when she went down to the ground, did you hit her again once she
Yeah, a couple more times just to make sure she was dead. Yeah.
We found tires set up near the body. Did you set those up?
Yeah, there was tires, yeah, and a bunch of wood and debris and stuff.
Why did you set the tires up there so you knew?
Try to hide the body. Try to, figuring then nobody gonna come, like old tires and stuff.
Did you go back and visit that body at all after you moved it from the landfill?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, just to make sure no one found it.
Joey says that this is all that there is to tell, that there are no other victims out there. Police, including Detective Tom Brennan, believe to this day that he's lying. While there's nothing publicly known that definitively ties him to other killings, there is one telling piece of evidence that police ask him about. Back in 1992, when Miller is arrested, police make an interesting find. Among the clutter and the knickknacks all around his house are 7 statuettes. And Joey is happy to talk about them.
Brennan had asked you about those statuettes that were found in your house. When
What?
the statuettes that were found in your house, there were 7 of those, and we have 7 victims here in Dauphin County. Was one for each victim?
Yeah. Actually, it was like, more like a spiritual thing. You know what I mean? To keep the, because I used to have bad nightmares and stuff. You know what I mean? So I try to ward off the spirit.
Oh, okay.
Basically, that's what that was.
When police say 7 victims here, they mean the 5 murdered women and the 2 who survived. But the big question here is, what if those 2 extra statuettes weren't for the survivors? Again, Joey says that all his murders are accounted for, but police don't buy it. And if we've learned anything about serial killers in the past stories we've told about Israel Keyes and Anthony Sewell, and in our conversations with FBI profilers, it's that they lie, habitually and pathologically. There's not a single thing, big or small, that you can take their word on. Police know this, and when it comes to the crimes of Joseph Daniel Miller, their eyes will always be open. Until next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is written, produced, and executive produced by Clark Goldband, Andrew Iden, and me, Dan Szematowicz, with original scoring by Shuvo Sur. Sales, marketing, and distribution support come from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.